Welcome inside another edition of Mountaineer Report here, brought to you by WV Sports Now. Mike Asti, Ethan Bock. Make sure to hit the notification bell, subscribe to us on YouTube, and also everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, etc. And it's a big game week, to say the very, very least, for the football program. These big game weeks, Ethan, they haven't gone so well so far this year. But this team, they're 3-2 overall, but they are now 2-0 in conference play. Only 5 teams right now are undefeated in Big 12 play, in the Big 12 standings. So the actual standings that count, not the random out of conference game between Big 12 teams that did not matter prior to conference play. And they will face one of the other ones in Morgantown under the lights. It's a night game the fans have been waiting for all season long. This isn't an FCS game. We argued at the press conference on Monday whether or not you want to count the FCS game as a night game because it was 6 and not 7. I don't. This is a night game, and this is a big-time game. Rocco Beck's the best quarterback they're going to face. His father's going to be honored as one of the newer members of the WVU Sports Hall of Fame. A lot of hoopla, but trying to calm it down and temper it from what happened prior to that Penn State game and leading up to that homecoming atmosphere. Pat McAfee's not going to do a show in Morgantown going into this one. And, of course, they also will debut the Coal Rush uniforms. So a lot going into this. And before we fully unpack what Neal Brown, players, coaches had to say this week on this kind of Oklahoma State recap / Iowa State preview show edition here of Mountaineer Report, Ethan, how big of a game is this for you? They win this. They're 3-0 in conference play. They have tough games coming up, but they can afford to drop them then. Mathematically, they're going to be right in it for a while. They lose this, they're still kind of in it, but this would be arguably the biggest win Neal Brown has ever had as WVU head coach because of where Iowa State is and how they are ranked right now. They are also undefeated. They would be fully in the driver's seat if they get this win, but this is at home, under the lights. That fan base is going to come alive again. Even the ones not trusting the climb are going to come alive for this game. So how big of a freaking deal is this for the team this year, for the program, and for Neal Brown?
Yeah, this is easily Neal Brown's biggest home stretch with Iowa State, K-State coming up during his tenure at West Virginia. And if West Virginia is able to beat Iowa State, just that 3-game stretch after blowing a 10-point lead to Pitt late in the fourth quarter in the backyard brawl, all momentum was gone from last season, that 9-win year. All momentum after you had an overhyped week, or not overhyped, just too much hype, too much pressure for that Penn State game, for that Penn State week.
You didn't show up. When you have that much hype, you got to show up. They did not.
At least be competitive. Like we said, it's the way they lost.
Yep.
And then you also have that Pitt, blowing that Pitt game in the final minutes, just to go and start conference play, potentially 3-0 going into K-State next week. You come back against Kansas. You beat the hell out of Oklahoma State and Stillwater, who was a team that was projected to potentially play for a Big 12 title game.
Yeah.
So doing that, that's easily Neal Brown's best road win at West Virginia, I would say. Just even though Oklahoma State, their defense is terrible. It's worse than West Virginia's.
That's what people would bring up, that Oklahoma State's been exposed. They haven't been able to get a conference win. They're overrated. It looked kind of like they quit a little bit in the middle of that game. They were desperate. Yeah, but it's a tough place to play. They have 5 stars on that roster, and Mike Gundy's team usually wins and turns it around. And they didn't because West Virginia never allowed them to. They buried the Cowboys. They are done.
The guy that killed them last year, Ollie Gordon, didn't do anything. So
nothing. Yep.
That if Neal Brown's able to beat Iowa State in another hyped up week with the Coal Rush uniforms, it's a night game in Morgantown.
Yeah.
It's a top 15 team coming in to Morgantown, an undefeated team as well. That 3-game stretch right there, that's really impressive. Like,
it really is, and it just makes you wonder if you hold on against Pitt, especially how Pitt's ranked now and Pitt is undefeated. If you hold on against Pitt and it's a winnable game, you are in the lead, you certainly are equal with them and could beat them. I'm dead serious when I say this, and it wouldn't even be a debate. I guarantee you West Virginia would be ranked in the top 25 of the AP, which is the poll Neal Brown's not been in. He's been in the coaches, but not the AP. They would be in the AP top 25 right now, 100%. Undefeated in conference play in one of the Power Four, at 4-1 with your only loss, even if you lose by 20 plus, to Penn State, who is a top 5, top 10 legit team that maybe could roll the Big Ten with how good they've been so far, and they have big games coming up too, but they look great. West Virginia would at minimum be in the top 25, even if it's like 24th. They would be ranked.
Just with the circumstances after that Pitt loss, where the program kind of vibe was, come back against Kansas, beat the hell out of Oklahoma State, and then beat Iowa State in a really hyped up game. If you're the biggest Neal Brown hater, I don't know how you can even put him down still at that point. Like that's an impressive 3-game stretch right there. You have to be somewhat impressed with that, especially going into next week, which would be another hyped up game against K-State.
Yeah, the schedule's not getting easier here, but what I think also this would prove, and I think he's proven it a little bit already, but what this would prove, Ethan, he didn't lose the team. He doesn't maybe have the trust of the full fan base because he blew that against Pitt, because the overall 6 years have not been great, and the overall 6 years people keep bringing up, and it's true. This is the overall worst 6-year stretch in WVU football history since the 70s, since before Don Nalen. They never had a stretch like this. He only has 2 bowl wins. They have nothing in terms of a trophy to really care about. There's no 10-win season. Dana got a couple of those, even though there were bad years. So this is the worst stretch. And Neal Brown knows it as well as anybody else. And you can talk about COVID or the vampire suckers that were in the program originally. What did Hubbard call them? The energy vampires that need to leave the program. Yeah, you can blame them all you want if you're Neal Brown apologist. But at the end of the day, this has been the worst 6-year stretch. And 2023 is really the only quality season, because the other bowl win was off a COVID year. They didn't even play Oklahoma. That's what the Neal Brown haters are all going to bring up. And all of that cannot be denied. It is just the facts. Just look it up on Google. However, here and now, and kind of what you're saying, they have the 9-win year last year. They managed to recruit well, if not better than even was going on prior. You get 4-star kids to come aboard. And yes, you blow the game against Pitt, but then to win 3 straight conference games, including a ranked opponent, getting arguably the biggest win you've had, because Drake May did not play for North Carolina. So this would be the biggest win Neal Brown would have. He will not have the trust of all the fans probably ever, even if they're in the playoff, but he has the trust of the players. You cannot deny it then. I think that at that point it would prove that no matter what fans say on social media, he has the players are trusting the freaking climb. Because if they were not, they would not have dominated Oklahoma State. They would not have came back against Kansas, and they certainly would get destroyed in this big game despite wearing the Cold Ridge uniforms. And we'll see how they play.
Also,
he has the trust of players right now.
You would have also seen guys potentially. We've seen this trend: guys potentially redshirting and
you would see that 100%. We talked about it on one of the recent shows. Yeah, 100%. You would 100% see that. There's a myriad of guys that are still really talented, that if there was energy vampires here and the team was floundering and missing bowls, you would 100% see that. It would be Messidor all over again. It would happen a few years ago, mid-season. You would 100% see that. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report. Before we fully get to Iowa State, and we may have a special guest to preview fully for the Mountaineer Cyclones big-time national TV game here later on this week. But before we talk about it, I do want to ask you about Oklahoma State. I did a recap show with the fans, and a lot of the conversation was relatively civil, but a lot of it was, okay, I'm really impressed, but how big of a deal is that? So did that say more to you about West Virginia, or more to you about this is just maybe going to be one of the worst years for Mike Gundy as a head coach? Which one of those was the takeaway for you after that big time win for WVU?
It's more impressive to me that West Virginia, when have you ever seen Neal Brown at WVU just blow out a team in a pretty good environment usually, and a team that's always competitive? You blow them out. When do you ever see that? That is single-handedly Neal Brown's largest road win margin. Even though Oklahoma State, they're going to have a pretty bad year. I mean, clearly. They don't have great quarterback play. Their defense sucks. Ollie Gordon's been struggling. So, and then the Oklahoma State fans are kind of just starting to get irritated with Gundy not adapting to certain things. And so
Talk about players leaving. If I'm Ollie Gordon and they said this on the broadcast, I wouldn't play anymore. I'd be done. I would shut it down. They're 0-3 in if they won that game, you can stay alive to win a trophy. But no, 0-3 in conference play, I'd shut it down, and then they might miss a bowl. Then, yeah.
Yep. It's this is exactly what Neal Brown envisioned how to win at West Virginia. Was this game against Oklahoma State?
Yeah.
Just they ran better against Oklahoma State and Stillwater than they did last year against Cincinnati and Morgantown, and they ran a lot on UC last year. The fact they did this on the road, and they've got Jaheim White really back to what we saw a lot last year. CJ Donaldson's still putting in touchdowns every game, and Garrett was getting his legs moving too. They got all three of those guys moving, and the offense just was clicking, especially in that first half.
100%. There's nothing about that game that you can't like, that you shouldn't like if you're a West Virginia fan. I mean, they didn't just win, and it was a must-win game, people were saying. But if they would have won the game by 3 points, they'd be in the same conference situation. Brown might be saying some of the same things. He still probably would put up 1-0 on over the schedule and kind of make it clear that week at a time. They are still right in the Big 12 race. But by winning the way they did, they played better against Oklahoma State than Kansas State did.
Yep.
They dominate. There was never a point in the game against Oklahoma State. And I wonder when else did you feel this way, Ethan, during the Neal Brown era? I was watching the Oklahoma State game. And even when Oklahoma State and they scored a couple times, or whenever some type of negative thing would happen to West Virginia, the entire game from kickoff to the end, I felt like doesn't matter, West Virginia's going to win. There was no momentum shift that Oklahoma State had for more than a second. Even when they would score, the Mountaineers would get the ball right back and just slap them right in the face. And it was like they sucked the life out from them. They did to Oklahoma State what Garnet Hollis wanted to do to Penn State. They crushed their soul and ended their season, basically is what they did. And that's easier said than done, even if a team's dealing with a rough season. They do have one of the better players in the conference. Again, maybe I know a lot of Oklahoma State fans brought up that Mike Gundy's stubborn, not even about the portal, but even in-game management, where he even said it during the broadcast. I'm sure you heard at halftime, they're getting killed. No, we got to still try to, stick to the run. Ollie Gordon's the best player. It'll open up the pass later. It's like, no, you're down 20. You're going to have to do some more things. They just don't have enough of a quarterback that can throw the ball. And maybe he let Bowman linger too long. A 7-year player is who he is. He's not going to get better. So maybe Gundy is losing something, but this is a Hall of Fame coach in a tough place to play on the road. And even the bowl game against North Carolina, because I have seen some fans bring up, like, does that count as a tough road environment because you're in Charlotte? There was a lot. I was there. A lot of West Virginia fans there. A lot of WVU fans there. That is not a tough road environment. The West Virginia fan base, I don't know the percentages to get into that stupid argument, but they were very competitive. They were very loud. They were very much into that game. I know you had to drive further than a North Carolina alum would have to drive. Don't care. That was not a tough road environment.
You still had a really good collection of West Virginia fans at that game.
Very loud.
And it's and Charlotte's a great alumni base for West Virginia.
Right. It's not right. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. So like 100%. That's not even close. He has other ranked wins that people do forget about because they're years ago, but this is right now the best win he's, could have. If he beats Iowa State, this would be the best win for Neal Brown overall because of all that it could mean.
This game, the game against Oklahoma State, like resume wise, it's not the best game.
Yeah, it's not a big win necessarily.
But it's like what you said. It's the way they did it. This is what Neal Brown envisioned having this team. Yeah. Maybe not by year 6, but maybe by year 4.
I'm sure he wanted to do it quicker. Yeah.
But it's just the way they did it. There was really never a time where Oklahoma State had true momentum.
No, not one moment. I cannot recall enough, and I'm sure someone will bring it up, but I cannot recall an outside the FCS games. And even then, some of those, I can't recall another game during the whole era where from kickoff to the end that West Virginia had momentum the entire way through. The other team had no chance, especially on the road against a quality program. So not an FCS
That's the
game.
thing, on the
Not
road.
not Cincinnati. Like, you could bring up the Cincinnati game in Morgantown, but that's a home game. Cincinnati had no chance that year. Their media was sitting there saying they had no chance before the game kicked off. Like, that was not the case for Oklahoma State. Yeah, they were 0-2, but we talked about, they brought up, people were bringing up nationally. Brown even said they're 0-2, but they have great players, and they had a really tough schedule. They had Utah and Kansas State, who were the preseason favorites. They could argue the schedule was just tough, which is why they're 0-2, but West Virginia fully exposed them as just a fraudulent team, overrated team, and buried them this year. That if you're an Oklahoma State fan, you're checked out now because of that game. Mountaineer fans have felt that in the middle of the season many times during the Neal Brown era. So they did everything you could want, and that is exactly why there's a lot more hype than there otherwise would even be. There would always be hype going into this game with Rocco back and the Cole Rush uniforms and being at night, but that adds Neal Brown said it, the players said it, I'll say it. That added more juice. To win that way going into this game, I think it opened up eyes even on Iowa State. So then we'll pivot into the matchup. Iowa State as one of the better defenses. They have one of the better quarterbacks. You could argue one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the whole country, certainly one of the best in conference play. The West Virginia program knows Rocco Beck very, very well. They never really had a chance to get him to West Virginia, but they certainly know him because of his dad and have admitted that they root for him outside of obviously this game coming up. This does feel like a game that matchup-wise, Ethan, West Virginia's secondary, to me, everyone's saying that maybe it got fixed. Jordan Leslie's going in the press box. Nobody's complaining about it right now. I did watch the game, and the only thing I could tell you is I still don't think it's fixed. There were still moments in that game that Oklahoma State, Bowman, who's not a great QB, still did find open seams. He did pick them apart a little bit at times. The game didn't allow it to be anything worse, but that secondary is still a problem. Rocco Beck could slice and dice that secondary, and even if West Virginia's offense is clicking and Jaheim White and CJ are going and they score points, this could be a really fun national game for everybody around the country. That could be a 40-36 game under the lights, national TV in a rocking place in Morgantown. That's what this game could be, but West Virginia's defense is still a concern, but it is a night game in Morgantown. What are your thoughts going into this game? What does West Virginia need to do to beat the Cyclones, who are a deserving favorite even on the road as a ranked team that no one can deny going into this game?
Yeah, West Virginia's secondary is not fixed. I think it's improved slightly, but not to an extent to where you could say, oh, it's okay. They've played two quarterbacks, Jalen Daniels and Alan Bowman, who are, let's be honest, subpar players this season. And Daniels, surprisingly, has been a subpar quarterback this year.
Yeah.
So ever since playing Eli Holstein, they've played not great passers. So I think that's helped a little bit. I'll give them credit. They haven't allowed as many chunk plays as they did against Penn State and Pitt, but still, it's not. I don't think it's fully fixed. And like you said, Saturday will be a really big test to see if that's fixed or not. West Virginia's just got to establish the run. I mean, it's their thing. They put up like video game numbers against Oklahoma State,
and they didn't do that earlier in the season in the bad games, right?
This is how they were really clicking last year in November, when you have C.J. Donaldson, Jaheim White, Garrett Green all running around collecting 200 plus yards collectively. That is their game. They can't get away from it. They can't go back to kind of like the Penn State game where they almost had an identity crisis and they got away from the run in a sense. And Garrett Green kind of looked like Jared Deggy for a couple of plays.
It looked like that offense. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So they can't get away from that. They got to stick to what has been helping them, especially last week. And that's just establishing the run. It sounds cliche, but it's what they are.
Yeah, and it's cliche to say, but establishing the run will then open up the easier lanes for the pass. It'll make it easier on the wide receivers. It'll make it easier on Garrett Green, because in addition to the secondary not being fixed, and Ethan, I think, I'll kind of take what you said and go one step further and maybe even more blunt with it. The secondary went from being god-awful to now just bad. Okay? They were god-awful. Now they're bad. They got to get to average, and then you can actually contend maybe in conference play if your offense is really, really good. And if you get above average, then look out and maybe you're getting closer to what it was last year as an overall collective group where you were good enough defensively, even though the offense was still leading the way. But they were so freaking bad. They were literally ranked 120th out of 132 at one point this year. So to get one solid game against an average to bad quarterback and a struggling team that looked like they quit in the middle of the game, as much as we talked about for 5 minutes and how big of a win that is, and it is, to win it that way, you also have to contextualize that secondary still needs to prove a lot more. They are bad now. They're not good yet, and they were god-awful, horrendous, any other terms you want to give. So now they're at the bad level. The bad level is still not good enough, but being at the bad level, okay, then you can potentially win some games if your offense is at a good to great level. And if they play like they did against Oklahoma State, that's where the offense will be. I don't know if there'll be that against Iowa State because Iowa State's defense is a much tougher test as well. It is going to be a lot harder for West Virginia to have two running backs dominate against that defense. That might be the best defense that those two guys are going to face so far in their careers together. So that'll be interesting on what they do there. But I think what they need to do, and is what you're saying, they need to commit and establish the run early and often, and they cannot do the thing they did against Penn State where, okay, Jaheim, here's a handoff for two, you go nowhere, so we don't give you the ball again for a quarter and a half. That they cannot do that. They have to keep on going to those players. And of course, if you're down by 3 scores, you got to throw the ball, but at that point you're not winning anyway. They have to establish it and just commit to it, and they cannot have the major blunders. Like you can't have Iowa State cannot score off a punt block. Like those things cannot happen that happened in the backyard brawl, which is how they blew that game. So that's also how you're going to win this. But what kind of advantage do you think being at home is going to actually be here? That a lot of times it's overblown. Mountaineer fans think, and Mountaineer Nation really believes that they can single-handedly steal this game. Brown has actually talked about that he does believe the fans, I don't know the percentage, but played a role in helping them come back against Kansas because they were so freaking loud that it was hard for Kansas to fully hear, even with helmet communication. Is that a factor here? That if this game was on it, to me, I will tell you, if this game was at Iowa State, I would pick Iowa State. But right now, I think West Virginia is going to win this game. And there's almost nothing else other than where the game is being played that's moving me off to change my pick here.
Yeah, it's a perfect storm. West Virginia has a lot of momentum. They're no longer that desperate team. I think in a way, Neal Brown could be desperate for that signature win. But at the same time, this team this season isn't desperate anymore. They're not scratching and clawing to try and neutralize the Pitt loss or the Penn State loss.
Right. Yeah,
they're now back on their feet.
Yeah.
They're 2-0 in conference play. They're back on their feet. So the fans will have an impact on this game. Like you said, if it's in Ames, I'm taking Iowa State probably 100% of the time. Their crowds are impactful as well.
Yeah.
But just it's a night game in Morgantown. You got the hype of the Coal Rush. I'm hoping the team learned its lesson, I guess, and it's not their fault exactly, but just the pressure put on them with a big nationally televised game this season. Hopefully they learn their lesson in mistakes from the Penn State and Pitt losses. And this could be their chance to get that big win this season. And I think the fans, even though the students this weekend are on fall break, I think they'll stick around.
You got to. I mean, I don't. Yeah, if there's 50K in that thing, that's going to be embarrassing. They are one of the. I do believe West Virginia has one of the best fan bases in the entire country for football and basketball collectively. They got to prove it in this game. If there's not, if at minimum there's not 60K there, that I will criticize the fans. I'm going to do it then. Like that is. I hear fall break. I hear that, but.
Hey, knock on wood. Also, there's no rain in the forecast for a home game.
Yeah, so I almost didn't even put it out in the universe because we're kicking off at 8:00. There's rain, and I am literally pulling an all-nighter. So, yeah, I'm hoping the rain does not happen here, does not get involved in this game as well. And Brown did talk about that They changed some things. They didn't feed into the hoopla as much. Yes, they cannot control what fans or even the program does. And I even defended at the time. Yes, there was a lot. And Penn State usually does win games when the opponent acts that way. But you have to. If you're going to play a big game week one, you gotta have hoopla. But you look at it this way: as much as Nick Saban was having fun talking to those guys, do you believe Nick Saban would allow his quarterback to appear on the most popular talk show going into the Iron Bowl or going into a big game like that? He liked being on the show, but I don't know how he would have handled that. So it's already over with. They didn't play well, and even if they lost, it would have been fine. But if they showed up, that would have been one thing. They did not show up. So Garrett Green sat there. They had the Neil Breezy shirts, and they sucked. They didn't do that, at least. The fans are still going to have hoopla, and the Coal Rush uniforms got to happen tonight, so they're happening in this game. It's a big game against a ranked opponent. This makes sense to debut them. If you couldn't do it against Penn State because that ended up being a day game, this makes tons of sense to debut them. But they got to show up, and I do think it's the right call from Brown to not allow. If you notice, the players are barely on social media. The press conferences were very mundane. There was no hot takes there. Clearly, it feels like there was a conversation. Brown's like, okay, we cannot control what the fans do, but we are not going to be part of this hoopla because it did not work out before. So you at least cannot say that if they don't show up. But if they don't show up for this game, that's almost room to criticize the players more than Brown. Like, I don't understand. The other end of this too is we'll kind of wrap up the show. As much as that would obviously look bad for Brown and it would warrant criticism, Ethan, if you are Garrett Green or a big-time player like that, you may not care about the last 100 years of West Virginia football. You're only worried about yourself now. You may not care about Neal Brown's job in your heart of hearts, but you should not need any of that to motivate you for national TV against a ranked opponent with new uniforms under the lights. You should not need it.
The question is, then you just have to question how much are the players affected by the pressure of these games?
That is yes, 100%. Then that is, do they have the character to show up in big games? Is it even beyond the coaching staff? And is it just something in them that they just cannot show up for these? Because the Oklahoma State game, it was a big road environment, but it was kind of under the radar. No one nationally was really focusing in on it outside checking the score. They're going to have the attention of the country again because of when that game is being kicked off. A lot of other games will be over. You're going to have people watching. And if they show up in that game, certainly if they win that game, they may even get a vote or two for rank. I'm not saying they're going to get ranked. They probably still wouldn't, but they may start getting a vote or two because you might have people pop in their mind. Okay, they had a bad 5 minutes against Pitt. They blew that game. They're clearly not on Penn State's level, but they're actually a good team otherwise. That's what you got to prove.
And if Pitt and Penn State keep winning, just makes West Virginia's losses look more quality.
Yeah, and
very basketball-esque, but
that's what it is. I mean,
turn into.
USC is very vulnerable for Penn State off of their loss. Penn State certainly could win that game, and Pitt is a Cal team that they almost had a chance to upset Miami, but they didn't. So they're very vulnerable as well. Pitt is at home. Pitt and Penn State. I mean, Pitt and Penn State, both as insane as that would be, if they both 6-0 and West Virginia beats Iowa State. And even if you have 3 losses to 3 undefeated teams, if you lose to Iowa State, it's still going to be 3 losses. They're still going to have one in conference play. That's all that'll be talked about. But yeah, if you win, you do kind of want the others to keep on winning, even though I'm sure Mountaineer fans, they probably don't care about Penn State, but they don't want Pitt to keep on winning. And I do think Pitt is taking advantage of an easy schedule. But at the end of the day, if those 2 teams are undefeated and you get that win over Iowa State, that's even more argument to get back in that national conversation. But all that matters is Big 12 play. They will technically be in it. They do have a cushion now. If they lose this game, they then got to beat Kansas State, which is another winnable game because of what we've seen from Kansas State and because of where the game's going to be. Arizona will still be a hard road trip, but a lot in front of this team now with a really big game coming up against Iowa State. You cannot stress enough. This arguably is the biggest game of Neal Brown's career at West Virginia because of what it means when it's happening, what it could mean for the program either way, and the vibes right now. So I guess I alluded to, I'll say it. I do think West Virginia is going to win this game. I do think they're going to show up in this game. I do think they're trusting in Neal Brown still, even if fans are not. And I am picking West Virginia to win this game. I'll go on record. I do think the Mountaineers are going to win this game. if I had to give a score, I probably would maybe 34-30, something like that. I think Iowa State's going to show up too. What do you have?
Yeah, on the same page with you. This game kind of gives me similar vibes to the 2022 game. Just Jared Dagey and Bryce Ford Wheaton had some of their best games at West Virginia, playing Brock Purdy and Brees Hall, and that was 38-31. So I'm going similar with you. I'm going 38-34 West Virginia.
Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah. So I'm slipping the Kool-Aid right now. We'll see where I'll be after the game. But under the lights, national TV, Coal Rush uniforms. The players love them. A lot's going to be going into it. That is a big game, to say the very, very least. And maybe you could even have some backdoor conversations the way the world is today with Rocco Beck and try to get him to transfer. Probably not going to happen. They're clearly going to go with Nico next year. But a big game, to say the very, very least, and would be the biggest win for Neal Brown for all that it would mean. They are right in the Big 12 race. That win over a ranked team and to be 3-0 in conference play, I don't think anyone would have predicted that, no matter what happened in out-of-conference play.